Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, Your Excellency, the President of the Republic of South Africa, honorable members and fellow South Africans. On behalf of the African National Congress, I rise to express our unequivocal support for the adoption of the Budget Vote 1, the Presidency. We do so because this is not an ordinary budget vote. The Presidency is the center for strategic leadership in the democratic state. It is the institution through which the President, as a head of state and as a head of the national executive, exercises the constitutional responsibility to uphold, defend, and respect the Constitution, to promote the unity of the nation, to coordinate the work of the executive, and to ensure that the machinery of government is directed towards the realization for a better life for all. When we vote for this budget, therefore, we're not merely approving administrative expenditure. We are resourcing the center of government to coordinate delivery, enforce accountability, accelerate reform, rebuild state capacity, and give practical expression to the priorities of the medium-term development plan, inclusive growth and job creation, poverty reduction, a capable state, and a society founded on human dignity, equality, and non-racialism. We debate this vote in a year of historic importance. In 2026, South Africa marks 30 years since the signing of the democratic constitution. This is not a ceremonial milestone. It is a moment to reflect, renew, and recommit ourselves to the unfinished task of social and economic transformation. The Constitution was born out of bitter struggle. It emerged from the long night of colonial dispossession, land conquest, migrant labor, racist exclusion, past laws, bannings, massacres, detention without trial, and the brutal arrogance of a parliament that once believed it could turn injustice into law, simply because the white minority commanded the numbers in the House. That is why our democracy is not a crude parliamentary democracy, in which a majority may do as it pleases. Ours is a constitutional democracy. Parliament makes laws, but the Constitution is supreme. The executive governs, but only under the authority of the Constitution. The courts interpret and enforce the Constitution not as enemies of our democracy, but as guidance of the compact that the people of South Africa made with one another after generations of division and suffering. The preamble to the Constitution describes our supreme law as a bridge from a past of deep division, strife, conflict, untold suffering and injustice, towards a future founded on democratic values, social justice, and the fundamental human rights. That bridge was not built so that the poor may admire it from a distance. It was built so that the dispossessed, the unemployed, the landless, women, workers, young people, and rural communities may cross into the new society. It is therefore profoundly mistaken to present the Constitution as an obstacle to transformation. The Constitution is not a brake for transformation. It is the mandate for transformation. It authorizes restitution, redistribution, and the tenure reform. It protects workers. It requires the state to take reasonable measures to advance access to housing, healthcare, food, water, social security, and education. It permits and indeed demands measures to overcome the legacy of unfair discrimination. The failure to fully use the transformative instruments of the Constitution cannot be blamed on the Constitution itself. To blame the Constitution for unemployment, inequality, and poverty is to misdiagnose both the history of apartheid colonialism and the practical weaknesses of the implementation. Our task is not to weaken the constitutional order. Our task is to make the Constitution live in the factory, the farm, the township, rural village, the classroom, the clinic, the police station, and the household, where dignity is still daily denied. The ANC does not approach the Constitution as a matter of convenience. We do not celebrate judicial authority only when it flatters us and attack it when it corrects us. A constitutional court is not an external assault on the democratic state. It is one of the ways in which the Constitution speaks to all arms of the state. When the court pronounces on parliamentary procedure, executive accountability, the processing of legislation, or the obligations on public power, it strengthens our democracy. It reminds that no party, no minister, no official, and no institution stand above the Constitution. That is why the ANC, as a liberation movement that fought for this constitutional order, must be first in line to defend judicial independence, legality, accountability, and the separation of powers. Of course, that does not mean there would be no instances where the movement or even the democratic state will disagree with certain positions adopted by courts. However, there is no contradiction between a revolutionary transformation and a constitutional discipline. In fact, without discipline, transformation becomes a slogan. Without accountability, power becomes patronage. Without the rule of law, the poor suffer first and suffer the most. Honorable members, this budget is also considered at a time when the world is marked by dangerous fragmentation, wars, unilateralism, protectionism, debt distress, climate shocks, food insecurity, disinformation, and narrow nationalism are reshaping global politics. South Africa is not insulated from these storms. We have seen attempts, particularly from the right-wing quarters abroad and their local echo chambers, to distort South Africa's reality, to weaponize our internal challenges, and to punish our country for pursuing an independent international foreign policy. This includes hostilities towards South Africa's principled stance on the devastation in Gaza and the case we brought before the International Court of Justice regarding what South Africa has characterized as a genocidal conduct by the State of Israel. But South Africa must not be bullied into silence. The ANC-led government has placed our country on the side of the international law, human rights, multilateralism, and the right of all people to self-determination. This is consistent with the best traditions of our movement and with the Constitution's injunctions that South Africa should build a united democratic country able to take its rightful place as a sovereign state in the family of nations. The legacy of South Africa's G20 presidents under the theme of solidarity, equality, and sustainability must be understood in this context. We use that platform to lift the priorities of Africa and the global South: fair trade, debt sustainability, climate justice, development financing, food security, industrialization, and a more equitable world order. This budget ensures that the presidents can continue to coordinate that global work while strengthening the domestic foundation of our democracy. Our international role cannot be separated from our African responsibility. South Africa is an economic anchor of the Southern Africa. And because of the relative size and sophistication of our economy, our infrastructure, our financial system, and our labor market, we are a major receiving country for migrants from the region and the rest of the continent. This is not an accident. It is a product of history, geography, unequal regional development, and continental search by millions of African people for work, safety, and dignity. The ANC's position must be very clear and principled. We reject xenophobia. We reject vigilantism, as the President was indicating. But we reject the demonization of African migrants too. We also strongly condemn and reject the display of arrogance and contempt from some of our foreign nationals living in our country. No human being should be attacked, humiliated, or denied basic rights because of nationality. We must never confuse criminality with nationality. The criminal conduct of the few must never become the identity of the entire people. At the same time, Pan-Africanism cannot mean that South Africa alone carry every social, administrative, and security consequences of regional underdevelopment or an irregular migration. Neighborliness is not a one-sided duty. Sister African governments also have responsibilities towards their citizens who live in our country, who live, work, and trade in South Africa. They have a responsibility to cooperate on documentation, consular support, law enforcement, voluntary return where appropriate, skills partnership, reintegration, and conduct of their nationals abroad. We therefore urge all our brothers and sisters on the African continent not to be hasty to condemn South Africa, as though the actions of a few define the whole nation. Such an approach risks deepening suspicion, fragmentation in the continent, and isolation of South Africa from the very African solidarity that we all need. Equally, we urge all South Africans not to surrender to anger, prejudice, and vigilantism. The answer is a capable state, lawful migration management, regional cooperation, decent work, secure communities, and the rebuilding of local communities. We must also speak plainly about the role and the actions of the private sector. It is too easy for business to lament instability while avoiding its own responsibility for investment, decent employment, and compliance with labor law. There are employers who have exploited the desperation of vulnerable migrants, including undocumented workers, to depress wages, evade benefits, and avoid bargaining obligations, and weaken the position of the South African workers. They then pass the social cost of this conduct to government and municipalities, as well as poor communities. Mr. President, this conduct by some within the business community is entirely unpatriotic. It is economically reckless. A country cannot build social cohesion when desperate people are set against one another in the race to the bottom. The ANC has always insisted that the dignity of labor is indivisible. A worker is not less worthy because she was born beyond our borders. But neither must migration be abused to undermine South African workers, trade unions, wage standards, and lawful employment. Corporate South Africa must also answer a larger question. At the same time, when communities are desperate for jobs, industrial renewal, and local procurement, non-financial companies have been holding historically high levels of deposits. Liquidity must become factories, machinery, skills, logistics, capacity, township enterprises, agro-processing, renewable energy components, rail rolling stock, water infrastructure, and export industry. The government cannot do the work that is expected alone, but it requires the participation of the private sector. We have a resilient constitution, we have a democratic institution that will stand the serious test. We have a president that must coordinate the rebuilding of the state, the acceleration of reform and scaling of employment programs, the defense of the rule of law, and repositioning of South Africa as a confident African state. By supporting the budget vote 1, we choose constitutionalism over chaos, transformation over cynicism, delivery over empty slogans, Pan-African solidarity over xenophobia, lawful migration management over vigilantism, and the dignity of work over the despair and the unemployed in our country. The ANC support budget vote 1, the President. Thank you very much.